Cool. All right. Hello, Stanford Web Campers. I'm excited to give this presentation to you all today. For this webcam presentation, I want to take us on a little bit of a walk through a small but growing niche of the internet that I think will feel familiar and hopefully exciting to many of you. I think when we work on the web, are always these like new tools, frameworks, and systems to learn about. And there's new technology is awesome, and I'd wager most of us are in this field to a great extent because there's always something new and like a new puzzle to solve, new challenges to get through. But for this talk, I want to go explore something that kind of goes a bit in the opposite direction. But to kind of just back up a little bit, and before we go any further, you're probably like, who the heck is this guy? So this is me. This is actually one of the oldest pictures on my Facebook. It's from 2007, a whole teenager ago. These are my professional notes, basically stuff you can find on my CV. But I really want to dig into some of the more fun stuff because all of this for my whole career started from the Amiga 1200, which is a personal home computer released in 1992. My dad was a major fan. He'd take me to computer trade shows or his best friend's computer shop where I'd play games like Shadow of the Beast, Worms, Lemmings, all that like good fun stuff. But as I started to get a little bit older, I wanted to be cool. And so I started to use Macromedia. And I used stuff like Fireworks, Flash, Dreamweaver, all that kind of really cool technology stuff to make websites and interactive animations and small little websites. I made Winamp skins. I made custom bitmap skins for my characters on The Sims. And I made tons of friends through good old-fashioned forums and online chat rooms. The bottom right there is actually a web archive capture of my most popular website from about like 2003, where I hosted custom skins I made for people to download. So, this is like really cool for a teenager. You can imagine I was very popular. But the point being is that I like spent a lot of my teen years making blogs, reading books on web design in Barnes and Nobles, where I'd sit on the floor in between the stacks and just kind of pore over this stuff. And dreaming and drawing up new ways to use tables and splice up images or use image maps on my websites. All of this is to say that I grew up on the internet, and I was quickly, as the internet was quickly becoming more visually rich, but the rules hadn't quite been figured out at that point, right? There was no rules around where a menu should go, what colors you should use. All that had to be yet to be defined and articulated. And I personally loved this time. Um, and it made me feel that the web was a place that I loved. And I think it's a place full of opportunity, a place where there's different stakeholders and audiences converging. And I believe that those of us who are working on the web have a duty to those we are creating with and those we are creating for. So I give all this background because I'm going to generalize a bit throughout the rest of this talk. So I hope you understand that I'm speaking from a place of love, respect for the history, and understanding of the paradoxes, trade-offs, and compromises that go into building for the web. All that to say is the year is 2024 and websites have become boring. So as I mentioned, I've worked on the web for a very long time, for a little bit over 2 decades. And for a long time, I felt this shift that's kind of been hard to name, but in the past maybe 5 to 7 years or a little bit more, it's become glaringly clear for me, which is that the web has become homogenous. It's languid, it's boring. Found this meme. Internet was invented in 1991. People in 1990, totally bored. But I think we can update this meme. People in 2024, we're still bored. So why has this happened, right? Who is to blame? So I thought we could maybe take a quick look at some of the usual suspects. There's things like business interests and the monopolization of online spaces. This is the kind of boring mass media, quote unquote, hot take about why the internet's become pretty boring. But then there's also this notion of a focus on growth, leading to an explosion of who websites' audience is supposed to be. This is an explanation that I think makes a lot of sense from people who work on creating new websites. You work with clients or whatever to try to figure out who is your audience, what are you trying to say with your website, and I think in those spaces it's pretty obvious that this has led a lot to homogenization. And then there's a third option in my mind, which is these notion of like tools like CMSs, frameworks, Bootstrap, Tailwind, or JavaScript libraries have encouraged us to create websites that are in like sort of fragmented. This is my personal favorite hot take. I don't even know if it's like that hot, but here we are. But the thing is, I don't really care. It's a deep and interesting question, but it kind of goes beyond the boundaries of what I want to talk about today. Because at the end of the day, when browsing the web these days, even if you're visiting a website for a supposedly creative entity like a brand or a design studio, there's this sameness, this sheen, this gloss that makes everything kind of incomprehensible, indistinguishable, again, boring. But I don't want to linger here too long because I'm sure most of you experience this feeling of sameness as you peruse the internet. For me, as I've felt this feeling over the years, I decided to try to figure it out, like what's really going on here. I wanted to understand the underlying thing that was missing from this medium that I spent more than half my life working in. What's really going on? So, it's not just that we have more tools to build better and faster, better in quotes. It's not just that most spaces now are full of bots and advertisers. You can look into the dead internet theory. And it's not just that design has become such a high value and easy to reproduce signifier that it now holds no weight in helping me understand if something is actually a high quality product or service. I think it's something else. Something that became clear to me a few years ago, but that I think AI tools like Copilot have pretty much like hammered home in my mind, which is that most websites are not made with care. This is not to say that websites are not built with attention to detail or with an extensive research and fact-finding, or that they are not accessible and accommodating to a wide range of audiences. I think like quite the opposite, right? Most websites these days have all of those qualities, but very few have this kind of human touch that I think is what a lot of us might miss from the early days of the internet. By being built with tools and frameworks that abstract decisions, these websites end up becoming abstract and lifeless themselves. They become subservient to the content. You look at something like Facebook or Twitter or whatever. They abstract away the fact that human eyes, biases, and hands made them. They don't become something greater than the sum of their parts. There's probably like something in here about how like the medium is the message, like some Marshall McLuhan stuff going on. But again, like that's probably for like another talk. But I say all of this again as someone who cares a great deal about our communal websites and online spaces, and as someone who's built his fair share of websites with Bootstrap, who's used boilerplates. I've installed dependencies and libraries to just use one function. Like I get it. When this is your profession, it's easier and smarter to use tools that will let you build faster with more cleanliness and with adherence to guidelines right out of the box. It's a pain. It's a pain to refactor an entire website because your Lighthouse score sucks. Like I get it. Like I've done it. I often still do it. And these tools were meant for specific jobs. And when the tool meets the needs of the job, not using it would be like pretty stupid. And that is a bit of a reference to Yarn there on the right-hand side in case people don't pick up on that. So anyway, I still, like, despite all that, I found myself more and more inclined towards side projects where I can shed frameworks, I can let loose the shackles of server-side rendering and Webpack compiling. And I've not only that, but I've like found myself working on these side projects that force me to look at a web page not as like a single like thing made up of a bunch of components, but as this whole entity and the website as a whole as a garden. And it's a very interesting metaphor to think about because I think that's how websites used to be thought about. And apparently, I think I am not alone because there is actually an ever-growing trend towards this approach, toward building websites, experiences, networks even, that are clearly built by hand with care, poetry, and passion put all into them. There are dozens of us, dozens. And I like to call this the resistance. And this is not necessarily like a super new trend. And I'd wager some of you in this call, on this camp, have never left this handmade community. There are talks and presentations and essays dedicated to criticizing the homogeneity I'm talking about ever since the days of CSS being introduced. So this is like, again, not a new idea, but I think it's kind of growing. And I think that a lot of it is because people who write code really like to think, write, make presentations about the work they do. And, since the turn of the century, there have been plenty of those. You can look at some of these links here. There's this, which is a whole list of articles, essays, presentations of people talking about how the internet used to be this thing, more fun or whatever. There's this whole talk by Neil Dash about how the web that we lost. And there's this J.R. Carpenter presentation from 2015, which actually also references an essay called The Vernacular Web by Olia Lialina. If anybody knows how to say that name correctly, please correct me, from 2005. So again, like none of this is new, right? But one of my favorite strands of this in particular is the slow media. If you take a look at some of this stuff, it's all about kind of like slowing down. And here's some snippets from their manifesto. So slow media is about contributing to sustainability, promoting monotasking, which I think is a big thing that a lot of us, especially those who work from home, might struggle with. Slow media is about making quality palpable. It's about discursive and being dialogic. Things are timeless or auratic, which is the sense that they have like an aura. These are not the like in order of the snippets of their manifesto. You can read more of it here. And I'll also post all this Google slideshow to the webcam site so everybody can kind of dig into these links on their own. But just to kind of give you a sense that like this is not new. It's not new, but to my eye, there is something new happening. It's a swelling of new voices and energy advancing this approach to creating on the web. It's not just a nostalgic turn, although that is in there. It's also about a sense of poetry, personality, making visible the reality that when we build for the web, we are building inside of, in collaboration with, and through a digital technology. These sites, communities, platforms don't seek to hide this fact, they highlight it. They honor the history of this space and add something new to it. In the 90s, the web was this way because there was a closer linkage between print and digital. Now, I think we've kind of turned back and are trying to reach back out into the real world from inside the machine. And there's many repositories and Pocket communities where you can see this playing out, but I wanted to use this webcam talk to share a few of my favorites. So I'm going to kind of click through some links. So one of the most interesting that I find is this thing called the School for Poetic Computation. And go to their website, and they're basically an experimental school out in New York City supporting, you can read it there. So what they do is they have a lot of classes. A lot of them are obviously online, but they have some in person as well. And they have everything, from like full, like multi-course classes to smaller workshops. They have their own projects that they that they create. And obviously they have a very kind of old school computer aesthetic to the way that they present themselves. And a bunch of these projects are like super interesting to dig into. But again, I'll let you do that on your own time. So what am I? Sorry, I lost my tabbing capabilities here. And then there's another one, this hand coding round robin, which was basically this notion, this class that people would hand code a web page by working with others. And so you do some work, hand it off to somebody else, they do some work. It's kind of like a game of telephone, basically. And again, this is all pretty recent stuff. There's also classes at major universities about this notion of the handmade web. So there's this one at VCU, which is an entire course that has an entire syllabus and a calendar and exercises and all this stuff all around building for the web by hand. There's another one at SAIC in Chicago. Here's her entire kind of prompts and workshop outline. And then there's this one at the New School. Again, it's about this kind of notion of this like generative web. And you see like a lot of these also obviously have the aesthetic kind of choices that kind of represent the ideas that they're talking about. And then there's like meetups, which is totally interesting. There's this thing called the Naive Yearly, which took place just a little bit ago in Denmark, August 2023. They had a whole like multi-day thing with speakers showing works that they were working on. Here's the list of them, and you can go and visit their projects. All of their projects were compiled into this this website where you can actually go in and kind of see the projects that these folks worked on. There's also super weird niche networks like Tilde Town, Tilde, however you want to say it, which is basically a shared Linux server where you like SSH into it and you like make all your stuff through terminal or whatever your SSHing tool is. And you also have to essentially to like get onto this, you have to go through an application process that is done in terminal. And a lot of this, there's a lot of stuff on here. These are all these people's pages. There's a range from really simple things to more kind of interesting things. Here's a great one with the frame situation for those who remember those days. And then there's Arena. Some of you might know, but Arena is basically a social media platform for lack of a better term, that is all around kind of sharing links from around the internet, and you can compile them into channels. And there's actually a bunch of channels on Arena about the handmade web. So if you search for it, you get all sorts of stuff. There's a class collection, which is actually from that handmade web class that I showed just a minute ago. But you see there's 458 results just for handmade web, which, if you pick up out a bunch of different terms, you can find more things. Here's a collection that somebody put together of all these kind of similar-ish websites. in the same sort of vein. And then there's people doing this for brands, artists, and events. There's this artist called Tori Moa. This is his current website. Um, this is an active like artist right now who's definitely like digging into this kind of aesthetic, whether or not he's meeting some of the kind of criteria that I was talking about earlier in terms of the kind of the love and the handcraftedness. It's hard to say, but definitely this aesthetic is popular. And then there's this website for this artist, Cindy Lee. This is an album that they just released like a month ago or something, built on a GeoCities website. Very classic. It's kind of been continuously built for a very long time. Uh, there's stuff for like an artist like this, like Friedrich Kunath, who is actually a painter, but a lot of his work is about kind of collage and pulling stuff from real life. And so this website was built with that kind of notion in mind, where there's all sorts of things that you can click on. Um, Maybe I went to a wrong page. This is the fun thing about some of these sites is that you don't always know exactly what you can do. And so it kind of really forces you to sort of dig into like your exploration, kind of going like, what can I do here? Which I think makes it fun. And then there's this too much information, which I don't know why it's not letting me click on that. But sort of event. And then, of course, with this, obviously comes all the kind of like superstars making interesting things and teaching others. I think one of the most kind of high profile person in this space right now is her name is Chia Misola. This is her personal website with all the kind of projects that she's worked on. I can click on one of these to see which one, but it's again, like it can be hard to know, like, but yeah, there's stuff like this, right? Whereas you know, I miss every sound I've ever heard. Does anyone feel the same? Um, this kind of gets into these notions of like things being very poetic. That's kind of Chia's sort of world. This is her giving a presentation of her work in person, um, which I think is also another very interesting thing that's happening that I think is kind of somewhat unique to this kind of version of where we are, is that people are really using websites as a kind of tool for making presentations. There's Mindy Su, who some of you might know from their book Cyberfeminism Index, which has been, if you go into like any bookstore that is not like a major chain, you probably have seen this book. It's been very popular, kind of doing all the rounds, which is basically an entire kind of massive compilation of cyberfeminism work from I think going back to like the 70s. This artist, this designer, Elliot Cost, who kind of put together this thing, which I find very interesting, which is like a diagram of like different links, websites, and he kind of has them sort of in these sort of weird Venn diagram kind of map things. Multiplayer, ecology, myth, atmosphere, using these sort of themes to kind of describe them. And a lot of the stuff that I found and kind of digging into was also through here, which made this presentation actually very hard to put together because I would go, okay, I'm going to put together like a bunch of stuff, and then I would spend like 3 hours just like clicking through things and finding like really interesting stuff, which was kind of really hard to then kind of go back and be like, the web is boring when I just spent 4 hours not being bored. And then someone like Laurel Schultz, who I think is, she works with like New York Times and does some other stuff, but has a bunch of like a bunch of small little projects that I think are very interesting. She also works at Arena. And of course, there's many others. So anyway, so to some of you, all of this might seem like just pastiche or a turn towards the nostalgic. And I think, again, in some ways it is. This article from Webflow, which touts itself as a tool that lets you build with the power of code without writing any. That allows you to take control of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a visual canvas. And Webflow generates clean semantic code that's ready to publish or hand to developers. That's like straight from their homepage. But here they have an entire like article about 14 iconic 90s websites, which was also quite a lot of fun. I'm sure maybe some of you will recognize some of these from the first time they came around, because I know I do. Here's the old eBay. So, again, like I think what's interesting about Webflow posting this kind of an article is that they're definitely in this kind of camp of making a tool for people to make websites where you don't have to code at all. You don't even have to like know code whatsoever. And yet they're like kind of showing off these websites where, I mean, you only like to make this, you had to know how to code. So I think there's this kind of like very interesting kind of thing going on. And for me, Webflow doing this is very much like they're using it as an aesthetic, right? But I think some of the stuff I was showing is it's like more than a surface level, it's more than aesthetic, and it's like it's this trend that I think at the heart is primarily a reaction against the bloat I was kind of talking about earlier. The trend that I'm looking at is born from creators who put restrictions on the tools and approaches they use, and in this way, find new and creative approaches to communicating through and with the machine. And I think it's all about like keeping things simple and light, about being honest and earnest. And it's about trying to express human sentiment, feeling, and experiences through the language of a machine. And these websites that I just walked through and many more are experiments in how we communicate in digitally native ways without losing our human authenticity. So I think when you find yourself stuck or bored, it's often best to go back to basics, to forget as much as possible and try to see the problems ahead of you anew. It's impossible to shed your knowledge and experience completely, but by taking a step back, you offer yourself the chance to see a new path forward. You offer your work, your collaborators, your audience a more careful outcome because it will have more of you in it. So whether or not you find these examples interesting or just lame hipster nonsense, I invite you to reflect on the tools you use and what conclusions and approaches they push you toward. Remind yourself of the old adage that when you have a hammer, everything looks like nails. And consider which tools you can try letting go of, even just as an experiment. They'll always be there for you if your experiment fails. So what might be gained if you limit yourself to using fewer tools and to create on the web with as much care, freedom, and expression as you can muster? And I offer you this link to a GIST that is a blank HTML page to kind of go back to basics. Anyway, thank you all. Again, this proceeding is not career, technical, or life advice. It's just my own ramblings. So please keep that in mind.
That was great. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if we had any questions.
We had a
yes.
link.
Yes, enshittification is exactly the best term. Yeah. Agreed. That was a little bit shorter than I had planned, but I'm happy to go back through any of the links or if anything anybody wants to go through anything. Yeah, Kristen.
Yeah, this is fun stuff. And I do miss those days. Yeah, back in the day. I started in the 90s, so yeah. I guess one challenge in this is one nice thing about this, and you touched upon it, this sort of like homogenization or whatever, is building in accessibility into these sites. And I feel like it's much harder to do that with these bespoke handcrafted sites. Some of them, they're so fun, but I know for me, just like contrast and like there are things where I was like, whoa, like I'm having a hard time, or just busyness, or like the overwhelm. So I don't know, like how do you balance that? I mean, each person has to kind of understand those principles and try to incorporate some of that. Obviously, it depends on who their audience is, but hopefully they are wanting to make things accessible as well. So I don't know, like there seems like there is maybe some trade-offs or that they need to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, basically everything I showed is not necessarily very accessible and has tons of those problems. And I do think that, like, again, I didn't want to kind of show this as like, this is the way we should build the future of the internet, right? Like, that was kind of my point, is like, there are plenty of instances where we do need to have like tools that allow us to make things very accessible right out of the box, like using all that sort of these kind of like leveraging these frameworks that get us there in the right way. I think for me, it was much more about wanting to explore this kind of like, there's this other side of websites and stuff that sometimes, especially people like us who work in Stanford and have to think about accessibility and all these questions with everything we do. that you can kind of end up missing that there's this whole other kind of world happening. And I think it's very interesting, kind of just keep that in mind, or like look over there sometimes, right? And explore. And I kind of was talking about this with Aaron beforehand, where it's like, for me, a lot of this plays out in small little things I'll just do like on the weekend for myself, to just be like, oh, right, how do I do this? Like kind of going back to basics, right? And it doesn't have to be anything more than that. I think. I don't know, like, I'm not going to sit here and trying to make an argument for people making websites that are very much like inaccessible, but I do think that there can be this kind of question of like, does every website need to be for every single person? And I think that that's like a up for grabs kind of question. I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's kind of my,
Yeah, thank you.
Ishita.
Yeah, this is a great presentation. I enjoyed it. And Kristen, that was, yeah, very well said about making things accessible. I've been working in Stanford Web for a couple of years now, and I'm a UX practitioner. And I think one of the first things, and you mentioned it, right? Who's your audience? That's the first thing that you answer. And when you're in the academia ecosystem, that's one of the first things that dictates like the type of website you're going to build.
Totally.
So I was about to say, you need to find the right project in order to do this. And what that also means is the content has to be right for these types of websites. And so just as much as making it accessible, you also want to make sure that your content is conducive to presenting it in that way.
Yeah.
And being open to presenting your content in that way. I think that's also the element is, what if we do this? How, we could see how our visitors interact, and maybe they stumble upon new things that we didn't think they would, or they haven't been so far. And all of a sudden now they explored a whole new section of our website, of our organization. And so I really like this. And I'm not sure if you all know, there's a big trend right now to go back to the 90s and the pixelations. And I think some of the tools went back to like the ways you could do your cursor, like the different things you could do.
Yeah.
So I think everyone's getting a little bit nostalgic and wanting to explore. So this is nice.
Yeah, like this one has like the old school like scroll bar and the things. Yeah. I mean, I think like that was kind of one thing that I was thinking a lot when I was putting this together, is that like the kind of trend back towards the 90s is happening in, music and fashion and all these sorts of things. And I think that there's reasons for that in like different, like there's tons of ways that you can think about it. I mean, I studied graphic design in school, and there's this whole notion of like the wheel of style, that things kind of come back every like 30 years or so. But I think for me, what I was looking at when I was looking at especially this kind of stuff is that the web feels like slightly different in some ways. Like, again, I think somebody like this, who's like an artist, he's clearly using it for an aesthetic purpose. He's like, this guy's a musician. He's not sitting there like hand coding his website. But I do think that it kind of goes deeper than that in some ways. And I think your point too about the kind of notion of content is very important. That's something that I was thinking quite a lot about, is that actually most of the websites, especially by kind of like single builders and artists, they're really thinking through like, what is the content and what is the kind of format of the content, and how do those two things like speak to each other and like elevate each other in a way that I think it's easy, or it can be difficult to think about in many projects, right? I can't sit here and build a website for the SAL project, like Accelerator at Stanford, and think about like, okay, every single article that we write, I need to make the web page look different to like, that doesn't make sense, right? But I think that it can be easy to then forget it is important to think about those things, even if you're not necessarily applying it to like everything you're doing, right? Yeah. Yep. Kristen?
Yeah, it was funny because my oldest son, he's CS major, and he's getting close to graduation, but he's been playing around with web stuff, for just to try it, and for his own purposes. He's really into insects and going out and exploring nature. And he uses something called iNaturalist, which is a really cool
Oh,
website.
yeah.
Anyone that's into learning about nature in your area and stuff, it's a really cool tool. So he was building the site and he shows it to me. I was like, I had this kind of very like flashback nostalgia thing because it was so 90s. I was like, wow, I really, really like this. And my husband's like, that doesn't look, I mean, you're not going to want to put that on your resume. That doesn't look very professional. I'm like, oh, no, this is good. You should totally put this on there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
well, it'll appeal to definitely at least us old school folks.
Well, and I think to me, it's also about that notion of care, right? Like what's interesting about it is not just the fact that it's nostalgic in some way, it's that like people, it's like making something that you really care about. Like that has this kind of like sense that people will respond to that because it's like, oh, you really actually find this interesting. You went through all this effort to make something cool and interesting off of it. And like that immediately has this kind of effect on other folks looking at it to kind of see why, like, why do you think it's interesting and why did you spend so much time doing this? So,
Yeah, that sort of that love, that handcraft feel. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sean sort of said this in the chat, but I always think that when we started building web pages, they were fully responsive and accessible. And then we kind of got away from that with tables and JavaScript and images. It's kind of funny to think about
Right.
that.
Yeah, I definitely think about that as well. You know, I on all my browsers, obviously, I'm sure most of you do too, have a lot of like ad blockers. And so I can kind of forget, but sometimes I'll like use my like partner's website or computer or a friend's computer and you go to a website, you're like, oh my God, right. Like people's like experience of the web is full of ads and like this horrible like pop-ups and everything, which I thought was very interesting that some years ago, the man who invented the pop-up said he was sorry. It's kind of like, oh, well, it's a little bit late.
But we had those back in the 90s too. I don't know if anyone had that experience where you like open something and all of a sudden it just pop and you're like,
Yeah, right.
what the heck happened?
Or
And you're like, shut it down. And it was
yeah,
usually not safe for work stuff. You're like,
right.
where did that come from? And then
Or going to a web page and all of a sudden music is playing.
yeah, and you're like, what?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions, but yeah, it was like a lot of fun to put this together.
It was well done, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm actually gonna share the link to this and get some of the other designers on our team to watch the recording when it's up.
Okay, great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I'll post this link to the Google Slides because all the stuff is in there. And I think there's tons of stuff that I could have kept going. And like that was what made putting this together take forever, was that I would just click on something and then be like, oh crap. And then all of a sudden you're like in this whole rabbit hole. You're like, oh, let me read this, 6,000 word article about something. And you're like, oh no, I'm supposed to be doing something else, which I really miss about the internet. But
I also like that it was your slides were not, it resonated with the feel, right? There was not a cookie cutter. It wasn't like you were following the same format on the different slides or whatever. So I think you were on point.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Drake. Glad you appreciated it.